Based off is Daf Yuda Aleph. And the Gemara had quoted a brisa that was darshaning the pasuk in Mishpatim in Tarof, Yitaref, Yaviu Aid. And the question is how to interpret the word aid, Yaviu Aid. And the brisa is talking about the case of a shomer sachar. He was paid for his shmira and he received a behema, and he was responsible for the behema to watch it, to guard it. And the behema was attacked and it became a treifa. And the Gemara darshans yaviu edim shenitrafa ba'ones upoter. The shomer sachar is poter for onsim as opposed to a shoel, and he has to prove, the burden of proof is on him, that the animal was attacked and became a treifa ba'ones. In other words, he provided the shmira ma'ula, the best shmira that he could have, and yet this onus happened. And Abba Shol has a different interpretation of this word aid, yaviu aid, yaviu eduda, or aduda. And aduda means the nevela, the carcass. In other words, what happens is here that the shomer sachar wants to cut down his losses, and he doesn't want to pay the full value of the animal. Let's say the animal was worth 500 alive, and as a dead animal, the carcass is worth 100. But what happens is that the carcass loses value with the passage of time. So the shomer sachar, in order to cut his losses, is well advised to urgently bring the carcass into Beis Din. And Beis Din is going to evaluate the market price of the carcass. So the Gemara suggests that the machlokas here between the Chachamim and Abba Shol is the machlokas that we mentioned on Daf Yud Amud Beis called Pchas Nevela. Who suffers the loss of the depreciation of the value of the carcass with time? Demar Savar, according to Abba Shol, Pchas Nevela de Nizak. In other words, if at the time of the nezek, or in this case, the time of the treifa, in the case of the shomer sachar, the carcass was worth 100, then that 100 is going to be paid by the mazik to the nizak. The nizak is going to suffer the loss of any depreciation in the value of the carcass. In our case of shomer sachar, the nizak, quote unquote, is the mafkid. He's the one who owns the animal and gave it over to a shomer sachar. Now the shomer sachar was responsible, because again, we're not interpreting the word aid as edus to prove that it was onus, but rather edus to prove the value of the nevela, of the carcass. So therefore the shomer, in the case of a shomer sachar and nitrafa, has to pay. He now brings the nevela into Beis Din, while it's worth a lot of money relative to what it'll be worth with the passage of time. Beis Din will evaluate the market value of the nevela as it is, almost immediately after its death. And then the shomer sachar will pay the difference between the 500 as it would be sold alive and the 100 as it would be sold dead. So therefore, the nizak, which is the mafkid, he's going to take a loss with the depreciation of the market value of the nevela, as it's no longer fresh and it begins to spoil. And therefore, what's going to happen here is, according to Abba Shol, is that the shomer sachar is going to be motivated to immediately bring the dead carcass into Beis Din to get that higher value, so that now, if it goes down in value, that loss is going to be suffered by the nizak, by the mafkid. Umar Sover, but the Tanna Kamma, doesn't have that drasha of hiduda lebezdin and bring the nevela sovar de mazik havi. He holds that the pchas nevela, if the nevela depreciates with time, that's going to be the loss of the mazik, which means that basically the shomer, who is poshea in this case, is going to suffer the loss of the pchas nevela. Basically, the nevela is his because he's going to pay the full 500. So we're not going to ask him to bring the nevela to Bezdin. The nevela is his, and he'll sell it. Obviously, he wants to sell it at the earliest possible opportunity because now, subsequent, or shall we say immediately following the death of the behema, when it became a treifa, the carcass is worth more money. So just to summarize, the machlokas now in the Gemara's Havamina between Abba Shaul and the Rabbanon revolves around the issue of Pchas Nevela. Who suffers the Pchas Nevela? Basically, according to the sheet of Abba Shaul, the Shomer Sachar, who's now the Mazik, he is going to pay only for the difference between the live animal and the dead animal. And we said that that was 400. And now the Nizak is going to suffer the loss of any depreciation in the value of the Nevela. The Chachamim, on the other hand, hold that Chas Nevela de Mazik Hafi, meaning basically the Nizak says to the Mazik, here, you take the Nevela, it's yours. You pay me for the full value of the live animal that was nitrafa, and now the headache is yours to try to get a hold of the nevela and get the most out of it on the market. And the Gemara rejects it. Lo, the machlokas does not revolve around pchas nevela. The kuli alma, the nizak. Everybody agrees that pchas nevela is the nizak, meaning what we said before was Abba Shaul, the Rabbanan rejected. Even the Rabbanan concede that pchas nevela de nizak. V'hacha b'torach nevela kod miflegi. Who has the headache of hiring Pa'alim to bring the nevela into Bezdin? Or, for example, in the case of a bar, to haul the bar, as we'll soon see, to haul the nevela out of the bottom of the bar and then bring it to Bezdin so as to evaluate it. So according to Abba Shaul, the tircha of bringing the nevela out and schlepping it to Bezdin is on the mazik. So the mazik is going to be toreach as soon as he can, so that he will limit and reduce the depreciation of the nevela, as we said earlier. And the Tanakama says no. The torach of hauling the nevela into Bezdin is on the nizak. Now you might ask, well, why is the nizak going to be motivated to hire Polim as soon as possible to haul up and schlep the nevela to Bezdin? And the answer is because kuliyama lo pligi pchas nevela de nizak. So the nizak is going to suffer depreciation in the value of the carcass, and therefore surely he'll be motivated to pay Polim in order to offset the loss of the Polim. He wants to immediately haul the nevela to Bezdin before the loss is significant. And the Gemara says, Vatanya, the Gemara now brings a raya from a brisa. The brisa is going to support the sheet of Abba Shaul that Torach Nevela is on the mazik. Acherim omer minayin shal balabor. Balabor means the mazik. Lahalos shor miboro, to haul up the nevela, the carcass, from the bottom of the bar. Talmud lomer kesef yoshev lebala vehames, which means that in addition to paying the nizak, whose animal died in the bar, for the difference between the live value on the market of the behema and the dead carcass, we're going to impose on the mazik an additional payment, compensation, which includes the nevela as well. So now the mazik is certainly going to haul up the nevela because it's his nevela, and with the passage of time, the depreciation of the value of the nevela is a hefsed for the mazik. Now the Rosh, and this is going to be a whole machlokas and Rishonim, he wants to say that basically what's going to happen is that the Nizak is going to have to hire Polim to schlep up the nevela, haul it up from the bottom of the board, but the Mazik is going to have to pay the schar of the Polim. So the actual telephone call to the Polim is going to be that of the Nizak. Again, there are many Rishonim who disagree with the Rosh. Hi, this pasuk, from which we derive the conclusion of Torah Nevela, Echidamit. What's the scenario? At the bottom of the bar, Shav Yezuzah, the Nevela is worth a zuz. The Aguda Shav Yarba, but if you haul it up and sell it on the market, it's accessible to any buyer, then it's worth 4 zuzim. So why do I need a pasuk to teach me that ki katarach b'nafshi katarach, that the mazik is going to have the headache of pulling up the dead carcass from the bottom of the bar? And it makes no sense, because even without the pasuk, we certainly understand that the mazik is going to be motivated to haul up the dead carcass from the bottom of the bar, because he's going to suffer the loss if the animal's carcass will depreciate in value as it disintegrates. Amalei, Rava says Tabai lo tzricha. What's the case of the pasuk? Debebera shav Yezuzah v'aguda nami shav Yezuzah. Very strange. According to Rava, the market value of the carcass is identical whether it's in the bottom of the bar or it's already been hauled up from the bottom and it's on the Sfas HaBar. So therefore, the mazik doesn't get any benefit financially by schlepping up the animal from the bottom of the bar. So therefore, we need a pasuk to teach me that Torah is on the mazik. Frekte Gemara, is there such a reality? Umika kai gavna, could it possibly be that even though you're going to pay Polim to haul the animal from the bottom of the bar, the animal, the carcass on Sfas HaBar is equal in value to the value of the carcass on the bottom of the bar? And the Gemara says there is such a mitzvah. And he quotes an idiomatic phrase to prove it. To Amri Inchi, people say, Kshura Masa Bezuzah, Kshura Dedavra Bezuzah. If you have a plank of wood and it's sold for 1 zuz in one city, then even if the Korah is right now out in the field and you have to bring it into the city in order to market it, nevertheless, it's sold for the same zuz, even though you're going to have to pay Polim to transport the Korah from the Sada into the ear. Now, once we derive that, as far as Nezikin is concerned, the Nevela belongs to the Nizak, and basically what it means is that the Mazik only has to pay the difference between the live shar and the dead shar. So the Gemara wants to know, what's the din in the case of a Ganav and a Gazlan, and finally a shol. Amar Shmuel, Ein Shamin lo leganav v'lo legazlan elo lin nizakin. In other words, there's a contrast here, according to Shmuel, between nizakin on the one hand, in terms of how much the mazik is going to pay if the animal dies, or if, let's say, he was mazik someone's kli, as opposed to the cases of a ganav and a gazlan. With regard to a ganav and a gazlan, if a person steals either uh, a theft at night, or stealthily, let's use that word, or brazen and bold, he steals a behemoth or a kli. The behemoth dies or the kli breaks, and now, of course, it goes down in value. Ein shaman. What does ein shaman mean? We're not going to bother evaluating the broken pieces of the kli on the market. Like, for example, in pottery, you could sell the broken pieces or the carcass of the animal, but rather the ganav and the gazan have to pay the full value of the animal. It was worth 500, pay the 500. And only in the case of Nezikin do we say that the broken pieces belong to the Nizak, or the dead animal belongs to the Nizak, and the Mazik only pays the difference between a Kli Sholim and the Shmorim. And this is what Shmuel said initially, and now Shmuel expands his principle. Vani Omer Aflish Shoel V'Abba Modu. That even in the case of a Shoel, the halacha is going to be Ein Shaman L'Shoel. The Gemara in a minute is going to vacillate about that, but let's interpret it according to one side in the original understanding of the Gemara, that Ein Shaman Lo L'Ganav Lo L'Gazan V'Af Lo L'Shoel. Now, the underlying lumdus of this statement of Shmuel is what we call bailus, which means that a ganav and a gazlan, and now Shmuel's expanding it to a shol, have bailus. They have kinyonig zela. And therefore, when the loss takes place, it's the loss of the ganav and the gazlan, or for that matter, the shoel. The shoel has bailus because kol hanosh shalo, and the ganav and the gazlan are bailim insofar as the Torah gave the ganav and the gazlan kinyonim. And when the ganav and the gazlan pick up the object that they're stealing, with that hagbah, they effectuate a kinyan. And as a result of the kinyan, ain't shaman, meaning any loss that takes place is the loss of the bailim, in this case, the ganav, the gazlan, or the shoel. But the Gemara is not sure exactly what Shmuel meant when he said aflish sholi, boilahu. Hachi Kamma. Aflish shoel shaman, meaning he was attaching shoel as an extension of nezikin. Odilma hachikam v'ani omer aflish shoel ein shaman v'avamotu. Meaning that aflish shoel in Shmuel was an addendum, an expansion to ganav and gazlan. Tashma hahu gav the shoel narga michavre. A person borrowed an axe from his friend, Tavra, and the axe broke, bipshia. Also, Kami de Rav, and the question came to the attention of Rav, how much does he have to pay? Amalei zil sholim le nagrami alma. You, Mr. Shoel, have to pay for the entire garzan, ma'ula, ma'alia means ma'ula, as it would be worth on the market before it broke. Shmamina ein shamin l'shoel. So Gemara asks, maybe Rabba, Gemara is now playing the devil's advocate. Maybe mida amri le Rav Kahana Rav Asi l'Rav Dina hachi b'shasim. In the aftermath of Rav's response to the question that came in front of him, he got attacked by Rav Kahana Rav Asi. And they said to Rav, Bitmiya, Dina Hachi, could the din be like that for Shosik? And Rav did not respond, which means that apparently he conceded to the question, Shma Mina Shomin. And we're going to derive from this that Shomin, which means that a shol does not have bailus the way a ganav and a gazan has. The shol is chayav for everything, even onsim, unless meisam apas malach, of course, but he pays the difference between the value of the object, in this case, the garzan, as it would have been marketed full and in its full state, and as it is now after it's broken. Itmar Omar Ula Omar Abulazar Shomin Leganav Legaz. According to the statement of Ula, and this is very important that it's Ula in the name of Abulazar, the law is that the Ganav and the Gazlan don't have enough kinyonim such that the loss of the object, let's say, for example, if the kli breaks, is their loss, but rather shaman. Beis Din will evaluate the market value of the shvarim, of the broken pieces of pottery, and that will be subtracted from the amount of money that the Ganav of the Gazan have to pay to the Nignav, and now it's the Nignav who will have to sell the shvarim. Rav Papi Omar, Ein Shamin, V'hilchasa Ein Shamin lo Ganav lo Gazanav l'shol Shamin kiderav Kahana v'Ravasa. So the final maskana, based on the statement of Rav Papi, and this we saw earlier in the name of Shmuel, is Ein Shamin lo Ganav lo Gazlan. However, with regard to a Shoel, he doesn't have enough bailus such that he's kona the entire object, including the shvarim, but rather will do a shuma and will subtract the value of the shvarim from the original value of the object, of the utensil, and he pays the difference. Now, at this point in the Gemara, and this will occupy our minds for the balance of today's daf, the Gemara brings a series of statements of Ula in the name of Rabbi Elazar that have nothing to do with the Sugya Nizikin. And the first statement of Ula, the name of Rabbi Elazar, has to do with the Yoledes. Now, in the case of Yoledes, let's just basically give an overview. This is in Vayikra Perek Yud Beis. She has what's called Yemei Tuma and Yemei Tara after the Leda. Our discussion here is going to be about a Shilya, the placenta. But right now, let's just give the broad sketches of the laws of Tumas Yoledes. If she gave birth to a female, then there are 14 days of Yemei Tuma in which she's not allowed to have relations with her husband, and in which any taras that she comes in contact with become Tameh. After the 14 days of Tuma, we begin 66 days of Tara. So the total number here is 80. So there are 14 days for an Akeva of Tuma and 66 days of Tara. Anytime she sees during the Meitara are Dam Tohar. However, if she gives birth to a male child, then she counts 7 days of Tuma and 33 days of Tara, and the total picture is number 40. Now, when a baby begins to develop after conception in the uterus of the mother, there's a certain in Hebrew it's called a krum. I forget the English translation right now, the word krum, but it's called a placenta. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, the vlad dies before birth. And the vlad becomes what's called nimoach. It's kind of, the fetus disintegrates inside the placenta. Now, when a woman has a miscarriage, then it's not called a leda unless we see the placenta coming in. Once we see the placenta coming out, we assume that inside the placenta was a fetus, and therefore she has the din of tumas leda and yimei atara. However, we're not sure, and we have no way of determining whether the vlad that she was carrying, that missed, was a male or a female. So we're going to be monesh lechumra. And what does that mean, lechumra? On the one hand, we're going to require 14 days of yimei tuma on the assumption that she had an akeva, but on the other hand, she's only going to get 33 days of tara on the premise that she had a zocha. The Amar Ula Amar Abelazar, Shilya sheyatzasa miktsasa b'yom rishon miktsasa b'yom hasheni. Part of the placenta exited from her body on, we'll call it a Sunday, and the other part on Monday. And now we have to suspect, and this is a chash sofek, that maybe on Yom Rishon, most of the vlad, which again, as we said, was machui, was nimoach, already exited from her body on the first day on Sunday. And therefore, based on that, chashash lechumra, monim la min harishon. We have to consider that the Yemei Tumah, which we said would be 14 on the side that she gave birth, that she conceived a Zachar, will already begin, those 14 days will already begin misafek on Sunday. Very nice that you want to be machmir and start the counting of her minyan on Sunday, but chumrah diasilei kulahu, built into this chumrah is a kula domitaheres lami rishon, because when you're going to calculate the 33 days of Tara, you're going to begin to calculate that one day earlier on the tzad that on Yom Rishon she already was a yoledes. Elo Amar Rav, but rather we have to reformulate the halacha hilachush chosheshes, but mimna lo money el shein, that we're going to take the chumras in both directions. On the one hand, we're going to start counting Yemei Tuvah 14 days for a Zachar on Yom Rishon, on the Chash, that maybe Rov of the Vlad was already born on Yom Rishon. But on the other hand, to count Yemei Tara, we're going to, delay and postpone it until Yom Sheni, because we have to be choshesh that maybe the Vlad only was actually born on Yom Sheni. So that would mean that we're basically going to start, let's say, on day 15 or perhaps on day 16. Frek the Gemara, Michael Mashmalon. What is Ula here, the way Rav interprets it, coming to Mechadish? After all, it's a logically deduced conclusion that you're going to have to assume Latuma from Yom Rishon and you made Tara from Yom Sheni. And the Gemara answers that Ula's Chiddush was the Ein Mikzas Shilya below Vad. That even if only part of the Shilya was, so to speak, born, in other words, exited from her body, we assume for sure that she had a Vlad and there was a Vlad inside the Shilya. We have a suffix whether most of the Vlad was born when Mikzas Shilya came, or maybe when only only a part of the Shilya came out of her body. That's not considered later. Frek the Gemara Tanina. We have a Mishnah in Masechet Chulin on Daf Ayin Zayin that is based on the premise that Ein Mikzas Shilya below Vad. What does it say in the Mishnah there in Chulin? Shilya. Now we're moving on to a slightly different turf. We're no longer dealing with an Uber b'mei ima, but rather an Uma b'mei behema. And the question is whether the shechita of the mother is meaningful for the Vlad. So Shilya sheyotza b'miktzas. And now we're talking about the placenta of an animal, of a behema. And before the shechita, part of the shilya, that's called miktzasa, exited from the body of the mother, let's say the cow. Asura b'achila. We're not allowed to eat that which remains inside the animal's body because shilya is a siman vlad be'isha, meaning even though only miktzas shilya came out of the animal, we assume there already was a laden. If there was a laden, then the shechita of the mother is not effective for the vlad. And if miktzas shilya, the Mishnah says, is considered a vlad as far as isha is concerned, which means that we're already with miktzas shilya going to count yemei tuma, then siman vlad v'behema. Then parallel, in the case of behema, that miktzas shilya is considered like a leda before shchita, and therefore there's no heter for the vlad with the shchitas ha'em. So it means that miktzas shilya, if it would be miktzas shilya below vad, then we wouldn't asa the entire shilya. And why is that? Because that would be what's called the svek. On the one hand, it could be that miktzas havlad of shilya, miktzas shilya, did not even have a vlad in it. And secondly, even if it had a vlad, maybe it wasn't rov. So now we're swinging back to the question on Ula. What did Ula add that we didn't know from the Mishnah in Chulin? And that's what the Gemara is going to answer now. What havamina would we have based on the Mishnah in Chulin? And therefore we need Ula to clarify that.